Um, I hope you enjoyed that brief break. And now back to as our final talk for the day before we move on to the panel, we have Jordan. So I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hi everyone. It's great. So I'm Jordan from the University of Birmingham, and today I'm going to be talking to you about the importance of building your own community. And really, this is kind of just a reflection on some of the life experience I had during my undergrad and how those things have kind of changed going into my PhD. As a kind of a side note, as a mathematician, I don't get to use PowerPoint very often, so the design choices might be questionable at best. So without further ado, and I also need to get this animation's working. So a little bit about me. So firstly, I'm a PhD student. Specifically, I'm in pure maths. Specifically, I look at networks and I kind of looking at probability and stuff in networks. I'll talk a little bit about that later. The next thing is I'm a pole dancer, a bit of a crazy kind of thing. So there's a photo of me and my friend Emily. This is actually one of the only photos I kind of have in my phone that I can use for this talk that won't make this talk have a content warning. It's probably a bit of a problem. And I am hella gay, or maybe have a bit too much time on my hands to be animating that. So that's a bit about me. Why am I here? What am I here to talk to you about today? So apart from obviously my deep love of stock photos, really this is a bit of a reflection about the places I went to kind of in my recreational time during my undergrad. Really the places I burnt my student loan away, that's essentially nightclubs, and why those weren't the best places to kind of build my community. The other thing, the reason that kind of happened is because I was really kind of lazy during my undergrad. And so I kind of just accepted that kind of default university experience. And so this is kind of the way of kind of how I transitioned out of that. And then finally, the dreaded part is I'll probably talk a little bit about the maths and the research that I do as well. That will just involve me talking about some random pictures. So we have more stock photos. These have nothing to do with what I'm going to tell you about today, but take with that what you fancy. So really, I'm just going to tell you a story about kind of one of my experiences in Freshers. So for those of you who are from the UK, Freshers is that kind of first week or so where you kind of go to university or I guess college. And before I want to talk about that, I want to talk about kind of a bit where I'm from originally. So I currently live in Birmingham now, which is like a big, really gay city. But before then, I used to live up north in Chester. And for those who don't know Chester, Chester is like quite a northern town. And I guess the only thing you really need to know about it is that Chester is really, really, really good at not being diverse in the slightest. Like if there was a competition for cities that weren't diverse, Chester would have a gold medal easily. And the reason I tell you that is because, especially when I was in school, I very much was kind of like the only really out kid. Like I had a really great time in school, definitely, and I've got a really great group of friends back home. But I was still kind of really the only person who wasn't out, the only person who was actually really out in school. And I was kind of like the token gay that was essentially tagged along to the friendship group. And while that's not really, and while that's kind of like just how things go, I didn't really see it as much of a problem until kind of now. But I was like, you know what? I'm going to university. This is my time to move to the big city, meet loads of people, make loads of really good friends, you know, become that big gay. I was a little bit twinky at the time, but I was going to become that big gay in Birmingham. So off I go kind of to Freshers. And so kind of how Freshers work, again, if you're not from the UK, essentially you get put into a flat with loads of random people. And then the university essentially sell you tickets to nightclubs, and you end up going to loads of different nightclubs that are kind of organized by the uni. And so really I just want to focus on kind of the first night that I went out. And that was kind of essentially, so the first night out was going to Nightingales. And again, for those of you who don't know Nightingales, it's one of the biggest LGBTQ+ venues in the UK. And you can imagine I was so excited. I was like, this is it. This is my time to meet loads of people. This is my time to surround myself with like a big community. And especially coming from Chester, which essentially had no gay venues at all, and essentially one club that turned into essentially an LGBTQ venue on a Tuesday night. This was a really kind of exciting experience for me. Anyway, so, you know, we get all excited, we have our drinks, we get dressed up in really cute outfits, and we head out kind of into the club. And I think the one thing that really stuck with me there, I didn't really know what I was expecting, but definitely, basically I kind of got there and the music was the first thing that hit me. So I kind of came in, and the music was like, was it Mr. Brightside by The Killers? And I was like, what is this? I was like, if you don't know, that's a song that literally has no taste and belongs in straight clubs, essentially. So that was one thing, and also really boisterous. It was like really hyper masculine. Everyone was pushing, shoving, shouting. It was really intense. It was just not what I was expecting. And so essentially I was kind of sat in the smoking area feeling a bit dejected, and pretty much my only view was, where's the Gaga, you know? And when I say where's the Gaga, I mean kind of where's all that great culture that I'd seen on the internet, where's that kind of, you know, all those kind of like great like drag queens, drag kings, all that great music. Like none of it was just there. And for me, that kind of just was not the night I was expecting. And the reason for that was essentially the university had rented out the venue and used it specifically kind of for like freshers or for students. And on one hand, that doesn't sound too bad, but the more you think about it, it's essentially a corporation going what is essentially a major LGBTQ safe space in Birmingham and converting it to all the other straight venues that kind of surround it. It almost feels a little bit like gentrification. The way that kind of felt for me was I just assumed that was a gay club, and that is what gay clubbing was, which kind of meant that I was like, well, this is just more of the same that I kind of had back home. And at that point, and as naive as it was, I just kind of accepted there's no community actually out there for me. And that's quite hard. I think that's, looking back, it's a really hard thing to say. And I was just, you know what, I was content with just being the token gay and just going around and kind of just doing the same kind of thing. And so what that really led to was me spending the next 4 years conforming in straight spaces. And those are straight spaces. For those of you also not from the UK or Birmingham, think of these are nightclubs, and think of your typical hometown nightclub with the fights on the middle floor, the misogyny, and the poor dress sense. That's essentially what these places were. And what's really interesting about these venues, and what's difficult about these venues, is that as LGBTQ plus people, when we go into these venues, we end up masking parts of our identity. So we kind of start to like hide some things about us, and we become very self-conscious because we don't want to stand out. You know, we think very carefully about kind of the way we dance, who we interact with, who we're kind of talking to. Back when I had a boyfriend, lol, you know, we were very conscious about the way we interacted with each other because we didn't really want to stand out in a space like this. And it's something, again, that straight people aren't too aware of. And also confrontation. So, you know, if something happens or someone starts anew, we get very avoidant. You know, we haven't got that support around us to kind of, you know, like in case something happens, we kind of just get very avoidant and we just want to get home and get away from it all. We don't want to stand our ground and actually say we belong here. So essentially, and the other thing about straight spaces as well is that, and it's a thing I was definitely with my friends, is that you end up putting your own comfort so that your friends can have a good time. And I think that's a really good thing, and every friendship should have that, but you end up doing that all the time and it gets really tiring, like it gets really knackering. These are stressful places already, and you're not going to meet people like you in spaces like this because they're obviously not going to Players Bar on Broad Street, you know? And so that's one really difficult thing, is that by going to these spaces actively, you are harming your chances of meeting your own community. Okay, and so I guess why does this matter? Because I'm here at what's essentially a STEM conference giving you a lecture on my experience of nightclubs, which I think is definitely a bold choice. And for most, really, it's this idea of it's the default straight path. You know, I didn't really think of like branching out, especially after that one night. I just assumed this was the case, and that was it. Now I was just going to be happy being the token gay, being the different person in a group of people who were all the same. And what happens as well is that here I'm talking a lot about recreation, but in terms of professional life, your recreation and your professional life are kind of two sides of the same sword. Like experiences I'm going to have in my recreational life, I will bring over to my professional life. If I'm struggling to find community in a recreational setting, I'm not going to go out there and look for it in a professional setting. It's just not, I just don't think it exists to me personally. Therefore, I'm not going to look for it in the workplace, or, you know, and that's a really sad thing. And it's definitely something I look back on and go, wow, I shouldn't have been doing that. And so why do you need community professionally? So in terms of where I work, university can be really, really, really straight. And this means a few things. Firstly, there's obviously the kind of the social aspect, you know, with the clubs. The uni basically just funnels you into all these straight clubs, and anything that's kind of any remotely different, they just kind of wipe out. That's the first thing. Also, academia has its own problems. Academia it's getting better, but it's severely lacking in diversity. The people I see in my seminars are the same people who were in those seminars 50 years ago, you know? It just hasn't moved on at the speed it really needs to. There needs to be more diverse and different voices in academia. The other reason it's a problem that university can be really straight is because maths is hard. This is probably the height of my animation skills. Here I've written maths, but you can use that in terms of anything you do professionally and anything in your kind of area. And what I mean by this is that when I do maths, I'm very collaborative with who I work with. And most of the time, I don't work with people who are LGBTQ+. I work with typically the stereotypical mathematician that you would see. And the problem with that is it goes back to the same idea of being in the nightclubs. You have to hide a bit of yourself. You have to put the mask back on. You have to really hide different parts of your personality to fit in. And that can be really tiring. So what's really important about having community in the workplace is that after you've done these work studies in your recreational time, you can find people who essentially get it. They understand you. You can essentially just be yourself. You can take off the mask. You can just talk to people and they just get things. I know sometimes, like especially allies can be really supportive. But if you start to get on something that's very specific to you, especially as a gay man, I talk about a lot of things that aren't so easy to spoke about to straight people, it can sometimes turn to judgment and they don't even realize it. So having that community around you, people that just understand you, is going to really increase your quality of life. It's going to increase your productivity, all that kind of stuff. So standing here now, I think I have a lot better understanding of community. I feel like I have a better place in the LGBTQ+ community, which I didn't have before. And so essentially what changed? What things did I do that helped me build my own community? So firstly was I started pole. So I started pole back in my 4th year. Pole is a really, really great sport. If you're looking for something completely different, I would always recommend it. Pole comes with wrongly a stigma from its kind of past roots. And that's something that I think is just, I could talk to you for hours about why that's a terrible thing. So what that does then is pole then, because it has this kind of stigma, it really attracts a lot of different kinds of people. It attracts people of all different genders, all different sexualities, all different ethnicities, all different religions. It just attracts so many different people. And it was my kind of first view of seeing community bigger than my small little bubble of friends where I was the token gay. I kind of saw kind of big outer, like so many different people, heard so many different stories and learned so much about things that I would never even considered. The next thing was, I don't know where my master's gone, was my PhD. So maths at my undergrad levels was very solitary. And I think there's that kind of stereotype that maths is very solitary. As soon as you start to move into academia and you're writing papers, it becomes very collaborative. And you end up having to collaborate with people who aren't in your own community. And so this was the first time where like, I was very tired of working with the same people and I just needed a respite to find people around me. And that's when I realized the need for community. The next thing was, and I think this is the biggest one, is the power of saying no. I think there's a kind of a concept that you should say yes to everything, you should get involved as best as you can, but also what takes even more strength is the ability to say no in a time when you don't feel comfortable. And I think it was kind of around my 4th year, I actually went, what am I doing with my life? I need to stop going to these places. This is ridiculous. I don't enjoy myself. I'm not meeting anyone that is kind of making me a better person. And it's that power of just saying no to these things. And once you start saying no, then you realize what things you actually want to say yes to. You understand, you actually find people, you actually find things that are actually important, things that actually matter. And so then the final one was also OSTEM. And I think OSTEM's an interesting one because I didn't take part in OSTEM really until I started my PhD. And if you asked me about OSTEM in the 4 years of my undergrad, I would have gone, yeah, I know it's a thing, but it doesn't really seem that relevant. And I can't say completely the way around. I've had so many great opportunities from OSTEM. I've met so many amazing people. And it really is that kind of catalyst for the intersection between your own identity and also your professional life. And I think that's something that we should all really bring forward. So that's the kind of life story section of this talk. So now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the maths I do. I think this is the last stock photo, I'm not really sure. So what do? I look at networks, which are really essentially kind of points, and points get connected if they have some kind of relationship with them. So really my kind of go-to example is if you're on Facebook, bit of an outdated example, but you have kind of points for the Facebook accounts, and then you connect two Facebook accounts together if they're friends, and you use that for all the accounts, you get this kind of big, massive kind of network. So one thing I'm really interested in is networks that come from real data. So networks that come from Facebook, or kind of train stations connected if they have tracks together, that kind of thing, or friendship networks. And what's really interesting about all these networks is that if you take large data sets, they all start to essentially look the same. They have what is called essentially a community structure. You have kind of these really concentrated hubs where everyone's really good friends with each other. And then between the hubs, you have these really weak connections. So for example, me at Birmingham, I have friends, hopefully. I have friends, and those friends are also friends with each other. I also have some friends who are up at Leeds University. They will have their own set of friends that are also very tightly knit. Between those two groups, some of my friends might be friends with my other friends' friends, essentially, and you get these kind of strong connections and weak connections. The other thing that's really important is something called small worlds. So some of you have heard of kind of the 6 degrees of separation. What that means is that even though these networks are really, really big and really, really complicated, people aren't too far away from each other. So for example, if I wanted to get to the other side of the world, say to China, going via friendship connections, I might say, well, I know someone who lectures at Uni of Birmingham. They actually also lecture in Jinan, and then I've now just crossed the entire world in literally 1 or 2 connections. And that's a really important property of these kind of networks. So essentially the takeaways are strong communities, weak connections, and then also small worlds. No matter how complicated it gets, things don't get too far away from each other. And essentially as a mathematician, what I want to be able to do is create some kind of model, a theoretical model of a network, and then put that against real data. And these things should be almost indistinguishable. And we have kind of ways of judging how good that is. So essentially, I'm going to show you, if you wanted to approach that problem, some attempts that you might have, which basically results in pictures that have been produced from me crying into Java. So the first one is the binomial random graph. So essentially, what you might do is say, well, the world's really complicated, friendships are really complicated, people meet randomly by chance, all that kind of thing. And essentially what happens there is what I've done is taken those points, and then for every pair of points, I've flipped a coin. And the coin's shown heads, then I've connected them. If not, then I've not connected them. And this is a really beautiful thing if you're a mathematician. This is there's so much work you can do with this, but it's terrible for communities. There's no actual structure or kind of community idea there. But what it does have, which isn't very clear from this diagram, and I only realized about an hour or so ago, is that it does have small worlds. So even though you can't see very clearly there, if you pick any 2 points, they're not that far away from each other in terms of the amount of jumps you have to follow. The other thing you might think about is, well, okay, people are friends because they live near each other, So what happens if instead I give these points kind of a location, and I say if any 2 points are kind of near enough to each other, then I should connect them. And you get something that pretty much looks like this. And this definitely is a thing. I can't believe I wrote that. This definitely is a thing. And it has this kind of community structure. So where I put these ovals, this is kind of these kind of dense community structure connections. And you kind of got that. So you've got these dense communities, and you've then kind of got weaker connections between them. The thing is, the connections aren't so weak, they're actually quite thick. So we have communities. The problem is we don't have small worlds. So for example, if I want to get from the bottom left corner to the top right corner, some nodes around there, I have to do a lot of jumps. I have to kind of move through quite a lot of nodes, and that's really a big problem. So then coming to what you might want to do next is go, okay, well, proximity was good. It made these communities, we just don't have small worlds. What if we change what we mean by distance? And I'm sorry for anyone who's algebraic geometry, I'm butchering your area entirely. So this is a Poincare disk, and what we've done here is change what we mean by distance. So the distance on the picture is not the same as the distance in the actual mathematical world. And so what's happened there is these triangles are still communities. And the easiest thing to think about is that points near the center have a lot more reach. They're closer to all the other points. As you get further and further away, the distances get exponentially larger away from each other. And you can kind of see that. You can kind of see, oh God, okay. I don't know how to go back. Oh my God. So yeah, so really what's happening here is that distances, you start in the center and travel to the rim, that distance doesn't change. But if you try to go left and right, those distances get exponentially quite large. And so what this means is that your communities become very triangular, and people towards the top of the triangle become more and more popular. And really, this is currently one of the best models we have for kind of real world data. At the moment, it's what a lot of my research is currently based on. So I think with that, I will now actually go to the slide 22, which is the end of my talk. So thank you very much.
Excellent, and thank you. I love the slide design. Just got a few questions now for you, if you're happy to do that. So to start off, do you feel that math sometimes gets excluded when we talk about STEM, especially in LGBTQ spaces?
Yes, actually, this is a really good question, because I think maths in general, I think it is kind of the odd child in STEM. I think some of the problems with that is it functions very differently to kind of the other areas in STEM. So you kind of have like in, physics and biology and engineering, you have methods and you produce very tangible things. I think with maths, it can, I think a lot of people have really terrible experiences with maths growing up, which I think is really difficult. But also, and then that kind of leads on to later life. But also in terms of like what we produce, it's harder to make it all. I'm lucky in my area that I can draw a lot of pictures. But I know a lot of my maths colleagues, they struggle to find really accessible ways of making the maths they do easier to a general community. So especially when it kind of gets to talks like this, it becomes really hard to kind of talk about your own area and also your LGBTQ experiences in it. I think maths is also a little bit behind in terms of diversity and things like that as well. I think maths is one of the worst ones for it, really.
Thank you. So next one is, how do you think universities/student unions can do a better job of helping people find the communities that suit them rather than just the standard straight clubbing sort of scene?
Straight throughs. So yeah, this I think comes down to signposting, because obviously I'm aware that we have like an LGBTQ society and we have OSTEM and they do really great jobs. I think the problem is it comes down to kind of signposting. So I think if I think about my experience, there was one experience I was essentially marketed, which was you bought all these tickets and you kind of went to these nights and that was it, and it kind of just puts everyone together. I think student unions can spend a lot more time thinking about what different communities or what kind of different, it's essentially putting on a lot more alternative stuff and making it clear who this is intended for as well. I think it's a really difficult one, because I think it's something that will get better over time as there are more and more events, but there's still not a ton of events now. So really the signposting is more important as more and more events appear and we have more ideas of what we can do. And obviously I'm only talking about clubbing here, but that's just my own kind of university experience. I think there's also loads of obviously things like sober socials and, like hobbies and kind of other things like that. It's really important that you have a broad spectrum of events for people who are also LGBTQ.
Thank you. Next question is, how can we make it easier to help hella gay undergrads in maths/EPS or encourage them to find communities they feel most comfortable with when they come to university?
So this is something I think we started working on. It was definitely something I started working on within my own EPS, was we were going to start having a lot more kind of like lunchtime, like we were going to have like gay pizza, I think it was called at one point, where we were really going to try and essentially get loads of pizza in and get people to meet each other within the department. And really that just kind of has to keep going. There needs to be a lot more events put on kind of, and I think also in the kind of visibility as well. I mean visibility is a hard thing, so it requires people to come out and not everyone feels comfortable doing that, and that definitely is a thing. But having like visibly gay lectures is something that always really inspired me, especially they were the people I definitely looked up to. So that's definitely one thing, but also having things like panels, things like this are great. Like things like this really connect other people, especially within STEM.
Thank you. Now I've got a maths question, which is, what are the applications of your research into networks?
Okay, so luckily I kind of sit at the kind of intersection between pure and applied, so I can get away with this one. Really understanding networks. So really one of the kind of things, the reason you want these theoretical models is they're computationally feasible to work with. So if I want to take a real data set, one thing I could really do is map that real world data set onto a Poincare disk. And now I've got something and there's a lot of kind of theorems and pure maths that you can apply to that to extract tangible real world results from your data set. Obviously you've got errors and approximations, but you're essentially taking something that's really real, something really chaotic, and you're giving it some underlying structure. And at that point, you can then make deductions about it. So something we're proving, which is currently we're doing at the moment, is proving that actually this Poincare disk graph, which is it's called the hyperbolic random graph, actually has this ideal community structure, which is essentially what we're looking at the moment. And then once you say that, then you can say a lot of things about real world networks in general. And also, sorry, for applications, I mean, there's like pandemics, for example, you know, that's an easy one. Those communities, you're going to get a lot of spread within communities. And suppose you wanted to say shut train lines or shut kind of travel to keep quarantine, you want to cut those weak connections. You want to keep, if you want to keep it contained, you don't actually have to remove as much of the network as you think. You can kind of just cut away at those weak connections and keep it contained within one community.
Thank you. So this is a nice question as well, because it going to lead nicely onto our panel next, but it was, what advice would you recommend in finding your space in COVID time?
So that's a really tricky one. Yeah, that's the thing. Obviously, everything that's been about today is really focused on nightclubs, which are probably the last thing you're going to get back after COVID times. So really now it's kind of, it is stuff like this. It's stuff like essentially joining groups at your university, or kind of finding spaces. There's like a lot of these kind of groups have gone online now, and they have kind of, you know, like Among Us nights or Discords, that kind of thing. And that's how you're going to get to really meet new people. So there's definitely that aspect to it. And I guess within your department, again, departments can do more to put events on. I think I haven't really seen, the department was getting better at putting EDI events on kind of in person, but since kind of like Rona times, we haven't got as many online EDI events really. And that's something that departments could strive to do more to really help people find their place in the community.
Thank you very much for speaking. It's really appreciated having you here.
That was great. It was a really great experience. Thank you very much.